Hi there and welcome to Ancestral Recall. I'm your host, Eli Kaplan. Ancestral Recall is a Magic YouTube show profiling the years of Magic's history set by set, explaining the lore, the hit mechanics, the coolest cards, the cards that made an impact, and some of the hidden gems that may spice up your casual decks or cubes. And today we're finishing up our examination of 1998's Urza's Destiny, the final set in Urza block and one of the most misunderstood sets of the game's history. Last time we talked about the mechanics, the lore, and the cycles, and today we're going to finish off the set with the best of the rest, look at the expensive cards, and we're going to give this set its proper context in time. We're starting off in white with the Banalish clans, noble chivalric warriors. Among these heroes were the seeds of the Capuchin clan, the family of Dominaria's eventual savior. Academy Rector is one of the most terrifying white 4-drops, telling opponents that if she finds a way into the graveyard, she's going to dump the best enchantment in your library into play without paying for it. Yeah, her 1-2 stats are pathetic, but white has no problems clearing all creatures from the board. Rector was an essential combo piece in the super popular Replenish deck. Oh, and did I mention Replenish? This sorcery, for 3W, allows you to put all enchantments from your graveyard into play. This card was used in conjunction with another Urza's Destiny rare, Opalescence, to turn all your other enchantments into creatures. Add Frantic Search and Urza Saga's Attunement, and you can dump a massive amount of enchantments into the graveyard in a hurry. In conjunction, Replenish created a huge army that could clean up games very soon after a Wrath of God. Opalescence itself is an enchantment-specific variant of Antiquity's Titania's Song, which allowed players to attack with artifacts. While Titania's Song eventually got shifted to blue with Mirrodin's March of the Machines, as befitting blue's proper role as artifact animator, white remains the king of enchantment. The set's nod to Wrath of God is False Prophet, who not only clears the board after he dies, he exiles all the creatures remaining. This puts the False Prophet into a rather lofty and elite board wipe club with mass removal spells like Final Judgment and Descend Upon the Sinful, since he deals with indestructible cards quite handily. However, in cubes, cards like Pacifism and effects like Oblivion Ring will make the Prophet feel rather frustrated. Flicker, for a mere 1W, is one of Mark Rosewater's favorite cards and the first card to make a card leave play, then come back into play, setting off triggers galore. While most Magic players refer to this ability as blinking, anyone who listens to Rosewater's Drive to Work podcast knows he prefers calling it flickering. This effect has been used many times, most particularly in Avacyn Restored, though its highest point came in Time Spiral block thanks to the flashback spell Momentary Blink. We're back in blue with the Tolarian Academy, and we're going to start off with Donate. Donate for 2U is an extremely distinctive sorcery, just plain giving an opponent of your choice a permanent you control, while you were controlling it anyway. Now, the classic choice of Donate was Illusions of Grandeur in the infamous extended Tricks deck, preferably with some cumulative upkeep counters on it already so that your opponent had to start paying for it. Seriously? Now, Saga block did have Delusions of Mediocrity, a weak sauce illusions as well. But this was a case where taking away cumulative upkeep actually made the card much weaker. Nowadays, you could hand them a Demonic Pact that's gotten some mileage out of it, and that is a gift that Liliana Vess would mightily approve of. Now, the only other card that saw play that was similar is the Commander Zedru the Great-Hearted, who can donate things at goodwill. At will, I should say. But Donate took a year or two to suss out, but once people saw its potential, it was a hit. One of the things that would not happen today, with the modern focus on creative syncing up to design, is the other weakness of Urza's preferred soldiers. The Metathranily are a lousy 2-3 for 3 that can only get through for unblockable with an aura. The Metathran soldier can sneak through for 1, but hey, still 2 mana? They're overcosted. Now, the Metathran as a species looked relatively cool, befitting Urza's panache, but overall, meh. They wouldn't last 2 seconds in New Phyrexia. Opposition is one of the cruelest enchantments ever printed. This was an amazing limited bomb, letting the weakest tokens handle your opponent's giant threats. And late in the game, you can just tap down the opponent's army to get through. Or if you have a lot of guys and your opponent doesn't have any, well, you can deplete an opponent's mana on their upkeep, denying them of almost any opportunity to cast things. Wizards saw that opposition was too strong and decided to fix it with Ravnica's Glare of Subdual, which was still plenty nasty, but still gave people the opportunity to cast their spells. Opposition saw some significant play in standard control as soon as the broken Saga combo parts got banned. If you love evasive creatures and want to exploit sneaky creatures to their fullest, then you want to try out Sigil of Sleep in your cubes. If you can reliably get a creature through, then you can force your opponent to replay their creatures over and over again. It's a hell of a mana sink. This even works with Prodigal Sorcerer type effects. The first time Wizards tried printing a creature that allowed you to repeatedly bounce things was in Legends with Time Elemental, but that card didn't quite work out. The next try, Temporal Adept, had a much cleaner template, and it had much less of a drawback. These days, the potential for a player to keep bouncing an opponent's land back to their hand, locking them out of future land drops and mana improvements over time, keeps Wizards from letting cards like this occur without specific riders to prevent them from targeting lands. The first blue creature that let you draw cards as a combat outcome was Ophidian, letting you trade damage for a draw. For one more mana, though, you get a strict upgrade with Thieving Magpie, giving you the draw and 1 damage, as well as an evasion ability. I played this in Standard in Adrian Sullivan's Chevy Blue, and the Magpie was a fantastic source of card advantage. It's a shame not to have it in my cube at the moment. If you're looking for the best version of an aura that lets you steal creatures, then you want Treachery. This aura lets you untap lands when it hits play, letting you have counter magic ready to go. And it only costs 1 more than Control Magic. I really wish that Treachery wasn't on the reserve list, because its dramatic name and brutal power are noteworthy. And since it's on an aura that goes on your opponent's thing, it's a lot harder to abuse than the creatures that untap your lands. It's not as fair as Rewind, but it's still close, and it's still really brutal. Treachery is a staple in power cubes, but it's definitely not a budget option. Black continues to show the rank and file of Phyrexia's forces. Attrition is a very powerful enchantment that lets you sacrifice any creature in order to destroy an opponent's creature, a guaranteed trade. The name's clear, and the ability was pretty powerful in an era where token producers were scarce. Now, modern sets have many more green token producers, so if it were reintroduced into Standard today, I imagine it would be quite the threat. And it has seen reprints in Commander decks. The worst, jankiest rare in the set was Carnival of Souls. This card depicts Davil, Wrath's first Evencar. Compared to the mighty Krovax or the manipulative Volrath, Davil was a whiny, paper-pushing cream puff. But I suppose that Yawgmoth has to work with limited human resources, or inhuman resources, well, you know what I mean. Now, the trigger of getting black mana and losing life every time you added the creature to your side of the table was a combo piece that never found a home. The name's Carnival suggests delight and whimsy, but the card itself never proved anything but mothers and groans. Here is an experiment. Take the idea of High Tide, letting islands tap for an additional blue mana that is tearing up competitive formats at the time of the set's release, and then give that card to black with Bubbling Muck. This instant could provide a one-shot of quite big mana late in the game, and yet Bubbling Muck never won anything because it wasn't paired up with spells that let you untap lands. This was a developmental experiment that either succeeded in that no one managed to break it, or it completely failed because no one managed to break it. But the fact that Bubbling Muck exists suggests that the risks that Urza's Saga block was taking were not carefully considered. As a response to the Phyrexian Plague Infector cycle of Urza's Saga, we get a death trigger version, Disease Carriers. These ugly ratlings could drag down another creature on their death. This is also much more humanoid than the typical magic rat. The chase black card in Urza's Destiny was the Phyrexian Negator, which in the lore represented the apex of Phyrexia's war machines. Agile and sleek, these horrors destroyed anything in their way. or at least in theory. The actual negator comes with a gigantic drawback, forcing its controller to sacrifice a permanent for each point of damage it took. Yeah, you could get a Dark Ritual to power out a 5/5 with Trample on turn 1, but if your opponent hit it with a Lightning Bolt, that would leave a board utterly devoid of resources. Now, Negator was a staple of Suicide Black archetypes, and New Phyrexia took this particular horror and inverted its trigger with Phyrexian Obliterator, turning it into one of Magic's most feared fatties. Another staple card that shows up in Urza's Destiny is Ravenous Rats. And while Urza's Destiny is not the card's first appearance, that would have been in Portal Second Age, this was Ravenous Rats' first appearance in a drafted, expert level set. The rats would get numerous core set reprints as an iconic, small black creature with a disturbing effect. Yawgmoth's Bargain was an attempt to print a fixed version of Necroponents by doubling its mana cost and allowing players to draw the card immediately instead of having to wait until the end of turn. But in a format where Dark Ritual was legal, this card found its way onto tables with surprising regularity, and Academy Rector was a very frequent partner to get it onto the table in a hurry. This card found its way to the restricted list unsurprisingly. There was a deck, Saber Bargain, that was one of the hottest decks in Standard at the time, after the bans. We're back in Shiv when we look at Red. And one of Red's most destructive, reach-friendly spells is Fling. Sometimes all you need to win the game is a few more points of damage, and throwing a valuable resource at the other guy for one more use, coming out of nowhere, is a great tactic. Bloodshot Cyclops takes a lot of the surprise value away, but is still brutal nonetheless. And it's a little ridiculous to put the card's nickname in the flavor texts. Yeah, it feels a little obvious, Wizards pushing things on us. But yeah, Chuck makes sense. Covetous Dragon was a key finisher in Kai Bude's World Championship deck as a solid finisher that could get ramped out early with artifact mana and manage to live through his own Crater Hellion triggers or Wildfire. Ruining your opponent's mana base and keeping your artifact mana, which enables a player to keep the Covetous Dragon by his side, yeah, that's a surefire winning strategy. With that said, big red archetypes such as Kai's are less common in metagames than cheaper red deck win builds. Covetous Dragon stood tall at the end of Saga Standard, going through ban after ban. That makes the card noteworthy, but that doesn't mean I like the card. Goblin Marshal was a conservative attempt at pricing an army in a card, and combined both an enter and leave the battlefield trigger with Echo. This was the big dream for Goblin Lackey pilots. In a few years, this Marshal was left in the dust by Siege Gang Commander, but for a while this was the very top of the curve for the Greenskins. Artifact destruction was crucial in Magic's earlier years, and one of the very few reasons to play green in this era was Uktabi Orangutans. Yeah, that art today would never see print. But with the realignment of the color pie, red is the king of artifact destruction, and one of the best artifact breakers is Keldon Vandals. Coming into play, they smash something, and that 4 power stack gives you a lot of incentive to pay for that echo cost and find another way to keep the Vandals getting through. This is a heck of a good deal for just 3 mana. One of the colors that really shined in Urza's Destiny was green. There's a lot of value in this color without hitting the free spell threshold. Let's start off with Gamekeeper. 4 mana for a 2/2? Okay, not great. But getting a guaranteed replacement when it dies is noteworthy. If your deck runs nothing creature-wise but Gamekeeper and Blightsteel Colossus, for example, it's very easy for your opponent to regret attacking into this guy or killing it. The random element does provide some inconsistency and balance, but this is still a very exciting card to play with. Speaking of cheating things into play, Elvish Piper was made with exactly that in mind. For a 4 mana investment and a single G to activate, you get to dump any creature into play. This doesn't count as casting it, so things like Myogian of Night's Reach's Divinity counter or Emrakul the Aeon's Torn's extra turn won't function optimally. But who cares? That kind of discount can be just plain ridiculous. Elvish Piper is slow, and if other colors want to get in on this act, they do have the option of Urza's Legacy's Quicksilver Amulet. but this card should rightly terrify opponents to make them wonder what horrors await in your hand. Pattern of Rebirth is another enchantment that lets you dump a creature directly into play when the enchanted creature dies. Surprisingly, this was the one green free guy of your choice spell that saw the most tournament play when it was in Standard. A few episodes ago I told you about Aaron Forsyth's Angry Hermit deck, but I briefly glossed over one of the most powerful land destruction spells, Plow Under, that helped make the deck run. Plow Under not only stunts your opponent's mana development, but guarantees that your opponent's next two draws are not going to be able to answer any major threats. This green sorcery often can be powered out on turn 3 or 4 thanks to ramp. There are very few green cards that destroy resources and ruin tempo like this. The card that was the closest predecessor was Ice Age's Stunted Growth, which forced opponents to put 3 cards from their hand on top of their library. But Stunted Growth didn't hit the mana production like Plow Under did. One of the strongest creatures in this Standard era was Massacre. No, wait. The strongest creature in this Standard era was Massacre. 4 mana for 4/4 stats? Check. Regeneration at an affordable price? Check. Having the ability to shoot blockers out of the way? Seriously? Check. Now, the Massacre had a steep disadvantage. You're going to be forced to discard a card every upkeep, but that kind of cost was fine when you were just winning the game and smashing through everything your opponent could throw in your way. I had the ability to try Massacre out at the pre-release, and it was one of the most stupidly powerful creatures I've ever wielded in Limited. I'm not talking Cube, I'm talking actual Limited. And Massacre was the first really powerful creature I ever got to pilot in a 40-card deck. I can tell you that you never forget that kind of feeling. This card directly inspired 2 Mythic Artifact Beasts, each with a signature drawback, and Massacre even got a callback on the staple draw spell, Deep Analysis. Yes, indeed, this specimen does appear to be broken. I used to power these out on turn 2 in Old Extended with Eladamri's Vineyard. That was quite a solid play. Powder Keg was an alternative to Navinaral's Disc in the small category of artifacts that wipe the board. While the keg had to take time to brew up to the proper number of counters, it was cheap enough to drop on the board and strike at exactly the right moments. This was a scalpel in comparison to the Disc's nuclear hand grenade, but that kind of precision was incredibly important and helped Powder Keg contribute to numerous metagames. There's a lot more to the set, and I'm going to leave you some gems to explore and find on your own, but I would be remiss if I failed to mention Yavimaya Hollow, a legendary land that taps for colorless mana, but is clearly aligned to green. Having the ability to regenerate the creature at will for such a low price is one reason this land is so sought after for casual formats. Let's take a short break to look at the most expensive cards from Urza's Destiny. Let's start off being honest. Urza's Destiny is the least powerful set in Magic's most powerful block. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing depends on where you stand, and how you feel about how good powerful cards are for the health of the game. Academy Rector, Metalworker, Raphelos, Massacre, Yawgmoth's Bargain, these are solid flagships to build decks around. Replenish combo was a real thing, winning out of nowhere with Pandemonium and other big creatures. And the only card that got banned from tournaments in the set was Metalworker. But in a standard era, dominated by combo decks that often won on turn 4, where the most dominant decks were usually shut down by bans rather than metagame swinging against them, Urza's Destiny did not change the pattern of behavior. There were control decks that could be combo decks, and a few aggro decks that could be control decks, and the combo decks wiped the floor with aggro decks. There was a template for the Golden Triangle, but it wasn't entirely there yet. I mean, you had a Golden Triangle, I would say, during the late days of Tempest Standard, but, I would say the quality of this triangle went down due to the broken cards. Eventually, Wizards replaced combo decks with a greater focus on mid-range value, creating the modern Golden Triangle that we have today, and tournament attendance was in decline after Destiny's release, though not as badly as when Mercadian Masks hit. So I can't really call Urza's Destiny a success in the larger picture. I also have to say that the failure of cycling from play to connect to the players was significant. The focus on death triggers rather than ETB triggers creates an environment more focused on micromanagement than additive construction. I like micromanagement, but they can't be said for all Magic players. Green got some much needed boosts to help it compete during the era of its consistent placing as the worst color, so that's something in its favor. And there's a ton of powerhouse Destiny cards that have a lot of open-ended utility in the set, which can help so many people in casual formats searching for just the right piece to help their deck fire on all cylinders. I have also avoided talking about the Urza Saga block limited environment. When the format was just Saga, black was easily the most powerful color thanks to Pestilence. Red got a stab at the lead with the release of solid cards like Gitu Slinger and Gitu Fireinger with Legacy, and while green got the best creatures in Urza's Destiny, black was still able to be solid enough to keep on to its lead as the best color throughout the block. Saga Limited was not particularly exciting, and Tempest Draft format was the most liked until Invasion hit the streets. Destiny's death triggers led to a lot of grindy games, I gotta tell you. So on the whole, while I'm not going to take any points off from Urza's Destiny for banned cards, its complexity with little payoff and unintuitive mechanics and combo reliance makes me say that I'm only giving Urza's Destiny a 5 out of 10, average. It's not a bad set, but it doesn't hit many highs, and that's why I'm only giving it a middle-of-the-road grade. But check out the set spoilers, and I'm certain that you'll find a few sweet cards to play with. So, I want to hear, what did you think of Urza's Destiny and Saga Block as a whole? Please share your thoughts and opinions in the comments, and be sure to like and subscribe. Next time, we're going to begin our 3-part look at Magic's 4th expansion, 1994's Legends. Legends created one massive precedent, gold spells, and started one of the game's most important super types to show heroic badasses and explorers. But as the first set printed without the East Coast playtesters designing it, with a generic Dungeons & Dragons-like setting, as well as printing issues, Legends didn't come without a host of challenges. Were they? Well, you're just going to have to stay tuned as we begin our Season 2 finale next time. This is Eli Kaplan for Ancestral Recall, signing off. Good games and good luck.